Hello. How are we doing? Good? Thumbs ups? Nice. I was thinking about it so you too, Cal and Deanna, no worries. Just like it's a big room with all of us, so let's kind of sit up because you guys will be talking to each other, like I said, quite a bit. So it's always good to be somewhat near somebody, but I like that there's space. You guys do feel free to spread out. All right, so today we're going to get into phylogeny. So phylogenies are tools, I would argue. They're often results in scientific papers. People find a new thing or they make a new discovery in this new phylogeny. It's a way of diagramming in the modern world, modern biology, how things are related to each other. And so they are these things you guys have seen a million times before. Sometimes they're called trees of life or whatever. And they're really important because they help us test ideas in biology. You might think of phylogenies as this like complicated thing. They are very difficult. I want you to know that like undergraduate courses, I remember very clearly how much I hated them. And then there's a moment where it clicked and I got like kind of what they were and how you read them. And it's going to take a while, but we're going to get into that today because once we have an understanding of like an evolutionary tree, we can use it to like ask questions. We can use it to understand anatomy. And so there's a reason I'm kind of leading in with this. You guys have taken organic evolution, which is 4417 in this department. It's usually a class people take kind of at the end because of how our course structure works. And that's something that me and a lot of the newer, we'll say, faculty are like, we need to do something where more of this is given early on because it's such a powerful tool. It helps us understand biology so much more. I put up a king cobra. I couldn't decide who the title slide would be today, but I really like that you guys like. King Cobra was first on Tuesday, so there I King Cobra. So there's the face. Is it evil? I don't think so, but I also don't want to like accidentally see one. I'd like it to be a contained situation. But anyway, there's your King Cobra face to start off phylogeny today. So this is where we kind of left off. I thought this would be like a sort of fun, quick activity that we could like try to get through, where we each write down basically 50 animals and then talk to each other. And that was dumb of me, because like, how could you possibly have that conversation and then have us get to something really rich in the time we had? And then I'm somehow going to find time to talk to you about like the course structure and all that, which of course didn't happen at all. So it was really funny for me to talk to the other new professors and be like, it's day one and I'm a half lecture behind, which is really funny. So don't worry, we're gonna fix it. But just to refresh you, this is what we were doing on Tuesday. You guys were coming up with lists of animals that you could think of from your own life, things that you knew about, and then talking to your neighbors about them. And I hope you looked at the list on Moodle that I kind of put together, and maybe you did, maybe you didn't, but like Googled some of the ones that you're like, I have no idea what that thing is. I have no idea what that thing is, because I hope throughout this class, there's gonna be a lot of like you seeing cool things that are on this planet right now that you might not know about, as well as like, I like that there was a big Idaho focus too, because there's tons of animals that are like in this county that I'm guessing a lot of you like don't know about. And so that's important too. There's two sides to that. So here's our lecture schedule, just screenshotted from the syllabus to give you guys some idea of like what we're going to be doing today or the next many times we meet. And so this is just lecture. I'll put the lab schedule together and you'll see this once we meet in lab not next Monday, but the Monday after that. This is just the lecture schedule. And I like to give you guys just a little roadmap so you know kind of like what to expect. So everything on here, you're seeing it doesn't say like nervous system, digestive system, skeletal system. The lab one will say that kind of thing. But these are like bigger ideas that we're going to come at with an anatomy focus, a comparative anatomy focus, an evolutionary biology focus. And so you can see I'm leaning pretty hard at the beginning in like giving you guys a really rich and deep background in biodiversity. And so the first few things we're going to do in these first 2 weeks, things like today and next Tuesday, we're going to be talking about phylogenetics and evolution. So like the basic vocabulary of any biologist working with a bunch of different kinds of organisms. Does anybody know what this drawing is? Yeah, this is like one of these things that some people get as like a tattoo without all the scribbles on it. It is a little bit like too poetic, like I almost can't believe it's a real thing, where like he actually in his handwriting says, I think, and he's just like, you know, vaguely sketching out like, what if things turn into other things and it's about time and descent with modification? And we'll call this one D and this one B and this one A. It's really, really fun that this was like somebody sitting there who you know way more than he ever knew already, just as like college students in 2023. And he's sitting there trying to like work this stuff out. Next week, we're also going to talk about where vertebrates are. And so there's going to be two important pieces of that on the tree of life. So here's a great big phylogeny of all of Animalia, all the animal life on this planet. And so I know you recognize some of those little cartoons over there. And one thing that always frustrated me when I would take an anatomy class, especially like a vertebrate class, or maybe it's a person-based class, is we basically start with like, well, let's talk about the history of this structure. Boom, fish. And you're like, well, what? Like, where'd the fish come from? Well, that's complicated. And, I'm going to condense it. We're going to go for it. So next week, you guys are going to talk about where chordates fit within life generally. And then what's really fun is there's a lot of animals today, many, many, many species that are in our, you're going to hear this later, our phylum, which is Chordata. There's arthropods and mollusks and other phyla. Our phylum Chordata, there's a bunch of chordates that aren't actually vertebrates like us, which is sometimes a surprise to people, that there are invertebrate chordates, which is a weird, funny thing. So we'll talk about that. And that basically takes us through next week. And then you can see we have basically a hard month of biodiversity. And so we're going to be talking about all these different groups. You guys are going to learn a bunch of names. I hope you're going to see a bunch of cool animals for the first time. But underneath all of this, we're going to be walking through the modern living vertebrate diversity's phylogenetic tree. And I'm going to be giving you guys characters, anatomical pieces of information that will help you understand the anatomical evidence backing up those relationships. So this isn't going to be an anatomy free, like, look at this cool fish, although there's going to be a lot of, look at this cool fish. There's going to be anatomy kind of backing that up. And you can see that takes us all the way to like end of February almost, and that's when we'll have our first exam. And so that exam will be on that first content. You can see it's basically like where do vertebrates come from, and then like all the vertebrates. So a lot of phylogeny and things like that. I want you guys to know, so exams will be in this classroom. They will be written so that you can complete them comfortably in our class time. I'm not going to drive you to the wall. And it's going to be very much conceptual. It's not going to be memorization kind of stuff. It's not going to be nitty-gritty kind of stuff. Pieces of what we do in lab will be on these exams. So the lab doesn't have its own separate like practicals or anything like that. All that kind of assessment will be just here for 3314 and 3314L. They'll all be on these exams. So again, I want you, as we go through class, you'll, I think, start to get a handle on it. It's going to be conceptual things. It's going to be ideas. It's going to be your guys' thoughts and like problem solving, less like remember these 15 things and draw the phylogeny perfectly. Although I'll ask you to draw some phylogenies. All right. After that, we get into, I think, the kind of some of the most fun part of the class where we go through like here's biodiversity. Some chondrichthyans, some smushy fish, some bony fish, just to get you excited. I forgot I did this. We'll talk about some amphibians, some mammals. Maybe you know what these are, maybe you don't. Some reptiles. I forgot I did this. So there you go. There's a cast of characters for the next month that we'll be hanging out with, and many, many, many of their friends. Okay, so then there's the exam. And then after that, you can see we move into sort of like these functional things. So comparing different kinds of vertebrates. And now that you know how they're related, now that you know the big arc of their anatomical structures, what are the different adaptations that exist for senses? That's a great anatomical situation. There's so many ways to sense your environment. Reproduction. There's a lot of insane adaptation, as I'm sure you guys know, because biology and evolution is basically all about successfully reproducing yourself. Basic stuff, diet, all the ways different vertebrates are adapted through their anatomy to specific, sometimes crazy specific diets. And things like locomotion. Vertebrates are, earlier on Tuesday, somebody mentioned that, mammals, there's so many different body shapes in mammals, and I threw up that word, morphological disparity. There's so many different ways vertebrates get around. They swim, they fly, they crawl, they dig, and a lot more than that. And many of them do it in the same ways, and many of them do it in totally different ways. So getting into locomotion, these basics of animal biology. And then we'll have our second exam after spring break. And then after that, we get into some more like kind of bigger idea kind of stuff. So things like special adaptations for like not being eaten, because you definitely don't want to get eaten. So that's one of my favorite lectures. We'll cram them together, deception and armor, the ways animals can defend themselves. Metabolism, anybody know what that picture is? I just realized I have you guys haven't spoke yet, and so let me know what that's a photo of. It is a hummingbird. What's the deal?
Hanging upside down.
It is hanging upside down. Do you guys know hummingbirds hang upside down? Anybody have any inkling of what's happening here? Yeah, Kevin. Yeah, so hummingbirds are famously like their heartbeat goes a million miles an hour and they're just eating sugar all day and they have to keep eating sugar. They have a really high metabolism. They burn through that fuel. But then at night, when they're migrating, when it's cold, they just shut it all down and they lock their feet and they just hang like that. So this is an animal that has the ability to go cold, but for most time is running real hot. So things like metabolism. We're going to talk about physiological extremes. There's a bunch of vertebrates that do pretty wild things to adapt to their environment. If you guys don't know this animal, this is a sperm whale, one of the big toothed whales of the world. It dives down thousands and thousands of meters into the Black Sea to hunt giant squid, but it has to breathe air, so its lungs are full of air the whole time. And that's weird. So we're going to talk about that, the kind of anatomy there. And then some really, I think, some of the most like exciting and like we're getting into like the freaky modern cutting edge biology kind of stuff. Communication. When you guys think of communication, you probably have some ideas of what communication means because you're a talking monkey person who says stuff. But there's all kinds of ways animals communicate successfully to each other and between species. And then of course, things like cognition and intelligence. A lot of really exciting vertebrate animal research today is like what counts as intelligent, as sentient, self-awareness? What kind of features exist amongst the other vertebrates? Because we think of ourselves as like check, check, check on those things to help us understand these kind of big questions. And I think this is where the fun stuff really is. So then after that, I have 2 lectures set aside 1 week where I can't contain it, and I want to talk to you guys about paleontology and anatomy. So we'll probably just end up picking one of these, and if we come across another one, we can change. I definitely want to walk you guys through anatomical transitions in the fossil record, because when we talk about only living animals, it's sometimes sort of like difficult to imagine the transitions between the different kinds of life. And so there's 3 that we can talk about. I love tetrapods, so how fish flopped up onto land the first time. How some dinosaurs, only a small group of dinosaurs, became the birds that you all know and eat maybe and love. And then of course, whales are these great animals that everybody has some sort of awareness of and usually a lot of excitement for. But of course, whales are mammals. And so it's like, if mammals live on land and whales are mammals, does that mean that there's a time when whales aren't on land or aren't on the water? And I'm like, yes, we've got fossils and all kinds of stuff to show you. And then finally, we wrap up the whole semester with you guys giving us some presentations. I'm going to talk way more about presentations when we are in lab, because there's no rush. It's literally the last week of class. But this is also in the syllabus. If you haven't looked at the syllabus yet, this is what it is. You guys are going to be going into the primary literature. You have complete freedom to pick your topic. You're going to bounce your topics off of me so I can help you and be like, oh, no, talk about that. And this isn't like a book report where you're like, I love whatever. Chameleons, and here's what chameleons are crazy. It's not going to be like that. You can like pick something about how their tongues shoot out or something. We're going to talk about it, but you get to pick what it is. You're going to use the literature to do it. I threw up some like, just examples of anything, just to give you guys an idea of what you want to talk about. If you want to talk about geckos on the ceilings, if you want to talk about the evolution of piranhas, like why is this carp so mean? That's great. You can definitely talk about piranhas if you want to. And so those presentations are going to be kind of the end here of our class. And then exam 2 and exam 2 and then the final are here and here. So it's important to you to put those on your calendar. There they are. And those exams are always going to be focused on the material just from that like section. So exam 2 is going to be all about diet, reproduction, and locomotion. Obviously, there's going to be a phylogeny or 2. So like if you delete everything you've learned for first exam, that's not going to work. But I'm not going to be like zooming in. These are supposed to be like little units of assessment for you guys. So it feels low stakes or relatively low stakes. I know it's big exams. And so you can see here on the right, there's dates here that are associated with our class meetings here in this room, when you guys are going to give me an idea of what your presentation topic is, and we'll talk about that. And then a few weeks later, give me like a list of like the papers you're using for your presentation and an outline of what your slides are going to look like. So that by the time we get to here, everybody feels well prepared and it'll be cool. So you're all going to be up here where I am now for 10, 15 minutes, probably 15 minutes, I should say, talking to each other. So I'm really excited for that. And this is always really fun. One of the students I had when I taught this class last time, her presentation was, she went real big and it was great. She did the evolution of venom and she did like venom across all the different kinds of vertebrates that have venom. So you can think big like that if you want to, or you can be like, I just love this fish and here's something really specific about this fish. I love that too. One student did that. She picked a Greenland shark, which is a shark that can live for 400 years. And she talked about Greenland shark longevity. So huge differences in scale of what people chose. But you guys, I hope during this biodiversity time, when we're walking through and you're seeing all this crazy stuff, you're inspired, and then you can kind of Wikipedia on your own and then tell me what you want. Okay. That was 15 minutes of me blabbing. That's what we were supposed to do on Tuesday. So I'm glad that is over with. We recognize these things? What are these things? What is this slide? Talk to each other for a minute. What is this slide? Are any groups want to let us know what they think what this is? Yeah, Cal. I think it's our favorite animal. It is all your favorite animals, and not just animals, because I asked you your favorite organisms. So yes, I don't know why I get such a joy of doing this, but I really do. So I like it because it's a good example of how like we can talk about anything if we're just talking about the big ideas. And so these are all the organisms you guys listed as like your favorite organisms. So good job. There are a lot of cats and dogs. Thank you very much. But besides all the cats and dogs, there is a nice diversity here. There's plants, there's fungi, there's a few invertebrates, an ant and a spider, a jellyfish. I don't know who said jelly. Rania, great, thank you. Love a jellyfish being on there. Who said the corpse flower? Ace, can you tell us about the corpse flower?
It's the most biggest flower.
How tall is it?
It's really tall, like
It's like 9 or 10 feet.
oh yeah.
This flower.
It smells really bad.
People know about this flower? It's called the corpse flower because it smells like rotten flesh. It opens up in the jungles in Southeast Asia and like it's pollinated by flies. And so it just smells like a giant corpse. It's terrible. There was one at the greenhouse in Seattle when I was in grad school, and they would like, everybody would get like a red alert text when like it opened, and then you'd be like, oh, yes, it opened. But that's a great organism. This organism is way taller than this organism, and that's cool because that's a flower. I think you'll know what that is. Okay, so the point of this is that you guys have, I think, cumulatively together, a lot of really fun prior knowledge of life on Earth. I'm not surprised by that, you're all biology majors. But we can use your favorite organisms to get after some of the things I want to talk about today, like phylogeny, like understanding biodiversity, making categories. So I want you guys to imagine, these animals and plants are spread all over the world. But if you imagine like a pre-scientific society, pre-Western scientific society, which is basically like any time before, I don't know, I'm gonna say like 1800s, anywhere in the world, human beings have been around for hundreds of thousands of years. Our species is hundreds of thousands of years old. And for almost all of that time, we've been surrounded by things. Sometimes they eat us. A lot of times we eat them, or we build our houses with them, or we make stuff with them. Organisms are all around us. We are a kind of organism. Also, really props to you guys, because I've never had a class where somebody doesn't write human as one of their favorite organisms, or like my wife or something. Good for you, you didn't do that. Which is totally valid. I mean, really, that's the real answer, but like, anyway, think about what it's like to be on this planet without some shared super brain, humans working together to like figure things out. There's no physics or math. You're just like sitting there on the plains of Africa or in a jungle somewhere, eating and living. When you're surrounded by all of this, you guys have the ability to come at this kind of an image with a ton of information. How in the world, if you put yourself in the position of somebody who doesn't have exposure to something like science, how are you going to ever do this? You know that you're alive and you're looking at your hands. You can see all these things all around you. How do you interpret what all of this stuff is? These flows of energy, this cycle of life, all these things that you can live in. I know this sounds very woo-woo. I'm just trying to like make you take a little step back from like the phylogeny stuff we're going to do today. And so I like to just like give you, and we're going to be angling at vertebrates this whole time, a little bit of background on some of these like fun questions. So as far as like the Western canon goes, so like Western civilizations, so the Middle East, Europe kind of background, as far as we know, the oldest record of somebody, in this case it's Aristotle, 300 years BC, is the first person to like try to somehow make a plan for cutting all this stuff up and organizing life, categorizing organisms around him. And so he spent a couple of years on this island called Lesbos out in the Aegean Sea off of Turkey. And he spent a lot of time like looking in the ocean, writing stuff down. So this is just kind of like fun facts, I think. This is this fish that lives in the Mediterranean today. It's called the John Dory. Aristotle like drew pictures of it and told everybody like what it was. This is like one of the first fish that's been like described by a person in some sort of like systematic way. Aristotle's the first person that we know of. Of course, probably many, many, many thousands of people knew this already and had for a long time. But he's the first person that wrote down octopuses like change color and move around and do camouflage, documenting things he's seeing in the tide pools in this Mediterranean island. And then he had these observations about these animals. Anybody know what these are? I won't ask you this every time.
Those are pilot whales.
Pilot whales, they're a kind of whale. And so Aristotle had a system for organizing animals that is, I think, fantastic, because where would you start if you really didn't have anybody else working with you, if you were by yourself? Answering that question. Aristotle had these two axes that he used to describe life, animal life: hot and cold, wet and dry. Mammals, he didn't use that word, but things that you guys would know as mammals are dry and hot. A fish is cold and wet. There's not a lot of things that are hot and wet, and not a lot of things that are cold and dry, at least in Greece. So he's got like a little bit of a two-part system here. But even back in BC times, Aristotle sees whales. They catch whales, they eat whales. He's like, these ones are interesting because they are wet, like the other wet things in the ocean, but they're hot, like mammals are hot. Well, he doesn't say mammals. So he knows that whales are weird. They come out of the place that's wet, but they themselves are hot. So they're one of the only hot wet examples that he has. So he's got something that's doing an okay job describing what he's seeing. Whales are problematic for him, and he notes that. End of work on this, right? It doesn't really change for quite a long time. After we get into like the Middle Ages in the West, Christianity takes over as like the dominant cultural influence. And so for a long time, you guys have probably heard of this from intro biology or in high school, the way people understood nature was part of a great chain of being. And so here's this real etching from the 1300s. And so you have things like plants are below the step that has beasts. And then above beasts are things like humans. And there's a couple other things, and then angels, and then God himself. And so this is the structure of life. And down here are things like rocks and water. Okay, we're understanding nature a little bit. We're trying to put things in some kind of order. This is a great chain of being that I love from the 1570s. I know you can probably see it a little bit here. You got Lucifer and hell down here. You got heaven way up top. There's Lucifer falling on the right-hand side. So go read some Milton if you want to know what that's all about. I'm not going to talk about it. But what I think is fun for you guys to see is there's your plants. There's your four-legged beasts. And then there's fish above them. And then there's birds above that. And then there's people. And then there's angels. And then there's God. Why are fish and birds suddenly here? And why are they above things walking? Well, so anybody, I mean, this is now extremely not biology. Anybody know why in the 1500s? Like birds and fish are there, but they're different. You shouldn't know this. I'm not saying you should know this, but yeah.
Would it be the order of the creation in Genesis?
There you go. Because I don't know what day it is, but day 3 is fish and birds, and day 4 is beasts of the land. So hey, they came first. That's pretty good. So there's a reason. Is it a scientific reason? I'm not so sure about that. Here's a great chain of being from France from 1745. I know you can't read it. Still have plants, but now we've added insects and seashells to the great chain of being. And then here's a bunch more mammals. Serpents at the bottom, of course, probably for other biblical reasons. But then there's fish and there's birds. But now the beasts are up near the people. Interesting. And in this French version, there's no devil at the bottom and no angels and God on top. It's just, you can't read this, but it says fire, air, earth, water, very Captain Planet-y down here. And then kind of an ordering to get up to people. People are at the top in the 1741. Interestingly, so are monkeys and orangutans. Just the orangutan, though. Because as far as Europe knows, in 1740, they don't know anything about chimpanzees and gorillas yet. But they do know about orangutans because the Dutch have been working in Indonesia for a while. Isn't that freaky and weird and unsettling that, like, This is an idea of the world that people would have, and it's based on like, some things about some parts of the world. I'm only showing you all this to drive home how it's like really amazing that you guys can sit there and like www.wikipedia.com and get so much information and evidence for claims. The big revolution in understanding life happens in the 1750s, just after you saw that French great chain of being. This is Carol Linnaeus's Systema Naturae. So this is where we get those words, phylum, kingdom, order, class. This Swedish guy went really hard at trying to put every single thing he possibly could into a category. He categorizes. You can see there's, if you can read it at the top, there's Roman numeral 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then some other things. He did a pretty good job of getting things together in a way that you and I are going to understand a lot better than like fish come above mammals because of creation. So here's these categories he has of the mammals. So you can see there's some like hoofy stuff, some rodenty stuff, some kitty cat stuff, relative boxes together, a way of organizing life. Categories of birds that we recognize that work. Some of these aren't completely really accepted today, but they're like an attempt at putting like birds with like birds. In the Pisces category, number 4 is Pisces. That means fishes, for those of you that don't do astrology. So it's fishes, and so there's lots of different kinds of fishes that are, all together, things that you and I would recognize as fishes. There are a lot of problems though, because this is still categorical. This is still forcing like exclusive boxes. Are you in this box or are you in this box? You can see number 1 is called quadrupedia, which means what? Quadrupeds. And yes, somebody said people are kind of quadrupeds, and so in 1750 Linnaeus, yeah, people are part of the quadrupedia group. Aves is number 2, that's birds. Pisces is number 4, that's fish. I'm not going to go over here because we don't care about them in this class, but you can see number 5 is insects and number 6 is vermes, which means worms, which is a nightmare. It's like slugs and mollusks and earthworms. It's a mess, but it's an idea, right, of a category. I skipped number 3. You guys can probably read number 3. Linnaeus had number 3 as amphibia. Did he mean what you think? No, he did not. Every snake and lizard and turtle and frog and salamander all together is in amphibia. So he's got some mammals, got some birds, got some fish, and then it has a mess. This box is called paradoxa, and it's great because it's him being like unicorns. I don't think it's a real thing. Griffins. That one is definitely not a real thing. And he's just like addressing all these beasts that maybe are real, maybe aren't. It's very fun, and I encourage you to have fun with it if you want. There are some hilarious, I think, in a modern eye, attempts on this chart that you guys can't see unless you can really read it. And when you look at Moodle, you can see this and look at it as close as you want. All the genus names are there. So the genus names are still modern in a lot of ways. Sloths, recently discovered by European peoples, are with the monkeys and the humans because they look like this. And so sloths go with us. Fun, not true by the way, but fun. And the other one that's really not great, whales and dolphins are over here in Pisces. And you can see these arguments in the 1700s where they're like, it breathes, I know, but it swims, and then they don't know what to say. So Pisces includes dolphins, Delphinus, belugas, they're in Pisces, according to Linnaeus in the 1750s. And so the whole reason I'm even showing you all of this kind of stuff is just to like emphasize this like evolving history and the struggle that happens when you're trying to categorize life in ways that are discrete. So those Linnaean taxonomic categories, which they are just categories, labels you can think of them as, they absolutely are still utilized by us today. They are valuable. They have use in modern biology. So this is an animal, the wandering garter snake, that lives in our region. You go out towards Yellowstone or Grand Teton, you might see one sunning on the trail while you go for a walk this summer. So wandering garter snake is a real organism. It belongs in a kingdom, and a phylum, and a class, and an order, and there they all are. All of those names are names that we use on phylogenies today. They are absolutely valuable to modern biology. But the problem is that what do you do if there's 3, 4, 5, 6 families in an order? 3, 4, 5, 6 species in a genus? The category thing fails there because all you know is they all go in there. If you have questions about how they relate to each other or what the next level of detail is, this linear kind of category structure doesn't really work too well. So this is valuable, we'll use it, but it can't be where we stop. So now I'm gonna have you guys talk to each other again. When I put out that note on Moodle on Tuesday, when I posted the list that you guys made of these different groups, I was hoping, and if you haven't done it yet, that's okay, you're about to do it with your neighbors. I want you guys to work together to come up with like definitive things that would unite this group, would unite this group, but would exclude all the other groups. I want you to really try your best to categorize fishes, categorize mammals, or characterize them, I should have written. Characterize mammals, what are the things that only mammals have, and if you find something new, it's gonna be a mammal because it has whatever. I want you to try to do that for all 5, and we're gonna spend a few minutes on this now, so go ahead and make a group of like 3-4 people and try to do this.
Then I got the specific things. So what do you do?
So very good.
And what counter point, but then next. But then now over. I need.
Well, that's
Those things.
All right, I'm hearing you guys go through the categories. I think I've heard most groups get to most categories. We're not done yet. You're gonna keep doing this. Just to add you as a prompt, pretend there's a story tomorrow morning in the, I don't know, on Twitter or something. And somebody found something in a jungle or a cave or the bottom of the ocean on a cool crawl. How are you gonna say, oh, I know that?
It lives in a cave, so therefore it's a frog.
That will not.
Yeah.
Like one. What is that?
I would actually. Okay, so I just realized there's 5 of you guys, like 5 conversation groups, so this is gonna work wonderfully. Any group want to volunteer to go first and pick which one they answered? Talk to each other for a minute. You're gonna give us one of your definitions, the character that'll help you.
We'll just.
Yeah.
Very.
All right, can I get a group to volunteer and just answer just one, yes, Madison.
Mammals.
Oh. What does your group say are things we can use to help?
Mammals make milk to feed their young.
Whoa. Milk.
And they have fur.
Fur. Anything else?
And that's all that we come up with for that.
Anybody else have anything they would add to mammals?
Sweat.
Sweat? Interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, Dan?
Live birth.
Live birth.
And it's
Okay, so there's a lot going on here. If we say live birth for mammals, why did I hear a couple different people asterisk most of the time? Things like a platypus lays an egg. Why else might they have an asterisk on live birth for mammals?
There's fish that have black fur.
There are amphibians that have live birth. There are fish that have live birth. There are reptiles that have live birth. Excitingly, there are no birds.
Yeah.
So, yeah, yet is right. Check back in 100 million years and maybe something will happen. Okay, so this is mammals. What's another group want to take another one? Yes,
So for fish, we put
fishes.
having a swim bladder.
Anybody know what a swim bladder is? Swim bladder. You guys are all gonna learn what a swim bladder is, don't worry. Gigantic asterisk because only one group of fishes have a swim bladder. So some fishes have a swim bladder. So this one gets this. What else for fishes did you guys say?
We were really banking on that one.
So like fully like walking on land, but has a swim bladder and like fish. Yeah? Yeah? Anybody else have something for fishes? Yeah,
Talk about like fully aquatic and have fins.
fully aquatic and, what's this other thing? So fins. I'm just clarifying, I don't have an expected answer, are like sea turtles and manatees and whales and all that, those aren't fins. Oh, those are flippers. Dang. Alright, so fins, what was the other one you said? Fins and
Like being fully.
fully aquatic. Fully aquatic.
Like sellers.
Yeah, whales, interesting. You guys can sit there and, Aristotle's on the beach, you've got some olive oil, you're just sitting around. You don't know what to do about those whales. Yeah, so wait, what? Are there any terrestrial fish that don't live in the water? I'm gonna tell you guys this, there's tons of fish that totally breathe air, and there's tons of fish that happily walk around on land, but none of them really always live there. So like, we can say aquatic habits. So here's what you guys have for fishes, asterisk, asterisk, fins. Okay, what's another group? Let's take another one. Yeah. Oh.
That they have gills as adults and it's in a shadow like fish.
Whoa, look at all that. 4 letters, rock solid. Gills as adults and its ancestry. We'll talk about these things. If you don't know what I'm talking about or what's being said, we'll get there. Gills as adults. Why did you have to say gills as adults?
Because all sorts of Africans have gills as babies.
That's frustrating.
All the time, so we had to put it ancestral.
And you guys have gills for a hot second when you're an embryo. You don't use them to breathe, but they're there for a minute and they go away. That's too bad. All right, gills as adults, ancestral. Okay, what's another group? Pick one of the other 3. Hasn't gone yet. Yes.
We'll do birds.
Oh, birds.
Yeah, hollow bones and feathers.
Hollow. I'm gonna give that one an asterisk. There's plenty of pink ones that are like, nope. Hollow bones and feathers is pretty awesome. If we add fossils, it gets a little spicier, but if we're just talking about living stuff, feathers on birds, okay? Anything else for birds?
Non-tactile wings.
Say what you mean by non-tactile wings.
Can't grab. You don't have hands.
But I showed you that a lot in the first slide, which is a bird that grabs it. But you're right, I know what you're saying. Why are you trying to differentiate non-tactile wings?
Bats.
Because of bats, because there's wings over here sometimes too. There's also wings kind of.
Fishes.
Yeah, you can kind of hear like a little bit. Wings, oh, all right, so we'll just say, I'll write that down, but I'm going to answer it.
Hollow bones.
Not living. Are there fossil crocodiles that are like super cute and like run around like cats and they're very fast? Yes. But that's not what we're talking about. Don't tempt them. All right, another group.
Reptiles.
Reptiles. Oh, you guys are stepping into the. Reptiles, what we got?
Mostly scaly, like some are scaly.
Asterisk. Which ones aren't scaly?
So I just.
I'm gonna say that's fine. I'll say scale, most and scaly. I won't asterisk that. What else?
They're cold.
What does that mean?
I don't know.
So cold, what does cold mean in this circumstance? Just say what you're talking about, because I know you're talking about that.
That's it, that's all I got. That's like.
If the iguana is like sitting there on the beach, like, is it cold? Touching, is it cold?
Colder than if it was a mammal.
Well, so, I'm gonna say lacking self-heat. Because one thing that we're gonna talk about in this class, there's plenty of lizards and snakes that have way better metabolism than mammals and birds do. But only like their optimum temperature in the middle of the desert, then they're just killing it. But then if you put them in the cold, they. And so it's not that they necessarily are cold or hot, but it's that they don't regulate it very well. I'm gonna put a big thing here because guess what? All right. Anything else for reptiles? Mostly scaly. This is a great. We're gonna have so many better words for lack of self-heat. Okay.
They all say
No. Plenty of, you guys are gonna see, I'm gonna have a bunch of like, sort of like, one of the lectures, oh, you know what? One of the Like when this class was 3 different meetings a week instead of 2, every lecture had its own little name, it was just direction 1 or direction 2. And I was very proud of it. One of them was just NSFW was the title of the lecture, and it was all like physical active mating and birth. And so I wanted gifts of like anacondas having live birth, live birth, you can do it. Because it's like this is the living room, but then an anaconda comes up. It's great. So there's lots of live birth here. Okay, live birth here. Lots of sharks for live birth. Great white sharks.
There's an entire group called Live Bear Fish.
The whole group of live bearing fish, but lays eggs. Also, of course, like lays eggs absolutely work here, just not exclusive.
Yeah, so don't sharks have like internal eggs that hatch within them and then they give like? Or
There's a whole spectrum.
okay, so that's.
Sometimes the egg is fully like an egg inside of her, and then it hatches, and then the baby comes out. Sometimes she absorbs the egg, and the baby does an embryo kind of thing that's placenta analogous, and then it comes out. Oh, it's gonna be crazy, you guys. It's gonna get crazy. All right, last group.
Nothing exclusively applies to amphibians. The closest we got was semi-permeable skin.
All right, this is semi-permeable skin. Anybody have anything they want to add?
Do they all lay eggs in water?
No.
We have,
Some of them lay eggs like within their own bodies, but they do like lay them. I know, I'm sorry. All right, here's the point. Here's the reason we did this. This was terrible, right? This was not good. So these 5 monoliths, absolute truths of biodiversity. Talk to each other about these 2 things. Are they?
no.
Yo. Okay, Will's asking about heading beak here. What do you think? Who's got a beak? Turtle's got a beak. I will tell you this, I know one of my master's students are all the master's things about beaks and turtles. So okay, there's definitely reptiles and beaks for sure. If you can include some, there's a ton of things out there, a ton of dinosaurs that are like a full beak. But the fish beaks that we call beaks are very different. Like parrotfish have beaks, those are made of like a lot of teeth all put together to make a superstructure. Like a sword of teeth to make, you have different ones for Power Rangers. Okay, so to make a big thing. A beak in a bird or a beak in a dinosaur or a beak in a turtle. Bone, same bones that you have in your face, and then there's keratin like on your fingernail that makes the surface. So birds have exclusively, and so do turtles. No more teeth in a turtle, no more teeth in a bird, both full beak, all the way. But that's not bad. No one's gonna fault you if you're like, birds have beaks. Right. Okay, I want to hear answers to these 2 questions. Anything anybody wants to say? Very open-ended here.
Amphibians are really hard to define, yeah.
Amphibians are really hard to define. Yeah.
It's kind of backwards, where you're trying to look at like the physical characteristics
Oh.
and saying, yeah, these are these things because this, but that's not why they're actually.
Okay, so the working backwards. Other things people talk about?
We decided that these were very useful, but not good.
Very useful. So. Would anybody really just say that this word doesn't have utility out in the world? When you're like walking through the jungle and you're not doing biology, you're just trying to walk around and look at stuff. This word is helpful. It means something. So does this word, and so does this word. This word is one that's extremely hard to define, but if you say it, almost everybody on the planet pretty much knows what you're talking about. So these words shouldn't be like thrown away. But the point is when it comes to things like evolution and phylogeny and the relationships amongst these organisms, these words start to fall apart. Are any of these easy to define? Which ones are easy to define? Mammals. I circled in a rectangle the ones that I'm like, those are rock solid and they absolutely are exclusive. I really mean it, that it's very unlikely that I would ever be like, and show you guys a bird you're support and be like, is that a snake? You're gonna know it's a bird. Birds are birds. Mammals can be complicated, but there's a lot of features that we know about mammals. It helps that we are mammals. So there's a spectrum here for these things. I use these categories. These aren't something that Linnaeus talked about. I use these categories because for whatever reason, in grade school for the last 100 years, this is what everybody learns. 5 kinds of animals, and then there's like bugs and stuff. I don't know why we do it that way, but you all came into this room knowing what these mean in different ways. So of course, not that long really after Linnaeus is when Alfred Russel Wallace and Darwin both publish similar time their ideas about evolution, where all of the life around us isn't there to suddenly be put into boxes in a kind of backwards looking way. Amphibians must have all these things. Darwin's thinking about, okay, wait, if I'm living up there at that top line, so that's the modern world, that very top line, and there's all these species I can see. Maybe if I go back in time, all these lines are a different period of time, and then an older period of time, and an older period of time, and an older period of time. There are things amongst these groups, or amongst all the living things, where I can see that these are more similar than others to each other. So if I go back far enough, are they going to be convergent? Are they all descended from common ancestors, successive, splitting again and again and again? And so, of course, that's the idea that defines all of biology today and what makes biology work, gives us testable hypotheses. If you guys don't know this, I'm sure you do. Origin of Species is Darwin's book, 1859 is when it came out. He's an old guy when it comes out, but most of the data that's in that book, he collected on the Beagle, which was an English survey ship that went all around the world. So Darwin's also one of the first people that wrote about how coral reefs make atolls, like those ring islands out in the Pacific. There's people in those islands, there have been for a really long time, but Darwin's the one that's like, it looks like it's a volcano that falls away and then the coral's all that's left. He's right. But on the Beagle is when Darwin was making observations like that. If you guys haven't read Voyage of the Beagle, I would encourage you to. Darwin's like a pretty good writer, and it's really cool to be like, it's 1830 when he does it. He's like 30 years old. And like all the chapters that are about them like dropping a net in the water in the South Atlantic and pulling up stuff and being like, what is this? It's just really fun. So anyway, you guys probably know this, but that is evolution right there. Biological evolution is a change. It's such a simple idea. A change in only the heritable characteristics, things that you can pass down to your children. Through biological populations, it does not happen at the individual level, it happens at the population level, gene pool level, over successive generations. You need a great deal of time for those kind of changes to be selected for, and then for those things to manifest in a new phenotype or something. All of that change really starts out in its rawest form as mutation, and then as you guys learned, of course, there's genetic drift, there's bottleneck moments, there's all kinds of things that affect gene pool, gene ratios. But ultimately, understanding that, like, wait a minute, if this is how life works, how deep must Earth history be? How old must the Earth be? All these things, which of course at the time, if you just spent the last 700 years putting angels at the top and devils at the bottom, and that's how it works. That's why this was such a challenging thing for people when it first came out. And of course, still sometimes today is not accepted or not understood by a lot of people. And so descent with modification is the big idea. Some babies do better than others. And if you just turn that up to 11 and leave it for a few thousand years, you're going to get different things. You're going to get speciation. Okay, so that's biological evolution. And so just to give you a little more context for how we are going to be using these Linnaean categories, because like I said, when you saw that garter snake, those categories that the garter snake fits into, chordata, squamata, those are real and valuable. So here's an example from like an intro bio textbook of like a black bear. So Ursus americanus, you go to Yellowstone, you might see a black bear. It's in a genus, it's in a family, it's in an order, it's in a class, it's in a phylum, and you can see the other things that fit into those categories. But those are just the categories. Those same names can be used and are used on phylogeny. So here's a phylogeny of some carnivoran mammals. I think you guys probably recognize these things: a leopard, a skunk, an otter, a dog, and a wolf. And so you can see things like on the phylogeny, which you've never read or seen a phylogeny before, what you do is you start at the tips and you go backwards. And so when two lines come together, that represents a common ancestor, and then you can go down from that. And so this lineage here doesn't represent a wolf or a dog. It represents the lineage that leads to the common ancestor of things like wolves and dogs. And so you can see here, there's four genera on this chart. The skunk's in its own genus, the otter's in its own genus, the leopard's in its own genus, but the dog and the wolf are both in genus. Then there's the family level, which again is totally valid, felids or cats. Both the skunk and the otter are in Mustelidae. That's not really true anymore, don't worry about it. And then Canidae is the dog family. But you can see if you added a bunch more things, it gets complicated. I like this diagram this is again from an intro, like I think it's actually from an encyclopedia, because what do you do with this? This is the problem with something like Linnaean taxonomy. There's information here. The mustelids are closer to the dogs than they are to the cats. But if all you have is carnivore and then dog, cat, mustelid, you lose that information. And so for a long time, if you guys look at like 20th century biology, there's like subphyla and super tribes and all these like other categories that people try to squeeze in. And then in like the 80s, people started doing phylogenies with computers, and we were just like, threw all of that nonsense out. And so now we have trees that we can read, and every one of these things gets a label. And we don't care if it's an order or a family or what the category of a label is, if that makes some sense to you. And so I just want to give you an example of that with what we're talking about here, with these big categories, or at least a subset of them. Here's 6 organisms that we know an unbelievably high amount of information about. We know about not the dinosaur, but their genetics, their developmental biology, their anatomy. So I can show you this. This is the phylogeny of how they are related to one another. Go ahead and talk to your neighbors for a second. Start at the top and trace the lineages back. Make some statements. Who's related to who on this tree and how closely. This is the tree, absolutely. So go ahead and chat real quick about that.
That's all right.
All right, so just focusing on
Like summary of language, practice.
so guys, so just focusing on relationships here. This is our first time like reading a tree, not looking for perfection or anything. And I didn't give you guys the evidence. I didn't tell you about all the stuff informing this. I'm just being like, trust me, this is it. Let's read it together. So give me anything you want, any statement here about relationships on this tree. It could be as simple like this and this, or each other's closest relative, whatever you want. Yes.
Appearance doesn't mean.
No, that's too much. Go even simpler. I mean, I want to hear what you're gonna say, but just block and block. Give me a relationship. Yes, yeah. Of these 6 things. So phylogeny is only ever about the 6 or 5 or 4 or whatever it is things. There's obviously thousands and thousands of kinds of birds. So if we want to get specific, like that's a kingfisher, or it's representing all birds right now. So you're saying birds and then that dinosaur are more closely related. If you follow their lines back, I don't have that meter stick. Yes, I do. They have a more recent common ancestor. This represents the common ancestor on this phylogeny of birds and big dinosaurs like this long-necked dinosaur. Okay, does that make sense to people? Then who is the sister? Who's the closest relative of the bird to dinosaur situation? And how would you know that? So if you trace, this is now the lineage that includes the common ancestor of both that kingfisher and that long-necked dinosaur. And here's another node, place where they meet. You could trace the croc line back. Now, of course, I could throw an alligator on there, and then the alligator would go right here. The alligator and the crocodile would have a common ancestor before any of them did, but then their lineage is the one that goes back down. Great. Give me some other relationships on here.
Fox is a lot different.
Fox is a lot different. Fox is kind of out on its own over here, right? What's the fox represent on this biology? It is, of course, just a fox. Could represent dogs, could represent carnivores. What else could it represent? Yeah, just all mammals. I could have put you, I could have put a sloth. This tree would have been the same. Could have put an elephant, could have put a dolphin. This tree would be the same. Okay, so there's relationships here that we can see. And my point is that I can tell you guys with like almost near certainty, that's, you know, we get in science, we never have 100%, but like, this is the phylogeny for these 6 organisms. That's easy. That's not great. Right? So there is something to this. There's a reason, Aristotle, there's a reason Linnaeus can be like, birds, aves, number 2, done. And we have, you know, we put the parrots over here, but he's right. Birds are birds. And then some of these categories are messy. And so to give you guys a little more context of why we moved away, why science has moved away from these labels, we're always now, the taxonomy does not come from above and define things. We use the tree to label common ancestors and then the descendants of those common ancestors. So to give you an example, how does that feel? Where that is the common ancestor of all reptiles, and every single thing that comes after that is in this clade. I don't say reptiles anymore. I say reptilia. It's got a capital R forever. If this is a node that is the common ancestor of all reptilia, and everything that descends from this is a reptile, does that work for you guys? Talk to your neighbors. Does that work for you?
Yeah, pretty good. If you kind of read.
So what do we like? What do we not like? Is there anything you want to say about this? Make sense? Maybe this makes sense. What is different though? It means that birds are reptiles. And what's great about that is that most biologists are like, okay. And it's fine. And guess what? The fossils are all like, Gadoy, everybody. If you want this to be called a reptile, this thing for sure is. Because there's all these raptors we have running around covered in feathers, just like a bird, hollow birds, just like a bird. So there's this reptile, so they're successive, they're nested within each other. And in fact, instead of caring about which one's the order, which one's the phylum, we don't do that. There's nodes that all have names. Crocodiles and birds, we pretend the dinosaur is not there because it's extinct, only the living things. Crocodiles and birds are each other's closest living relatives today. The closest living relative to birds that isn't itself a bird today is a crocodile. You can do comparative anatomy. You could look at their developing embryos. You could sequence the gene for like their hemoglobin, and you're going to get crocs go with birds. Turtles are over here, lizards are over there. Crocs go with birds. All the evidence says that. So there's a clade now. Doesn't matter what the level of that clade is. We're going to forget that. Archosaurs. This kingfisher, this crocodile are both archosaurs. That dinosaur is also an archosaur. Archosaurs, all of them are reptiles. That's a node that exists now. You guys have probably heard this since you were children, I hope. All birds are dinosaurs. Dinosaurs aren't extinct. Some of them absolutely are, but this node is correctly called Dinosauria. So dinosaurs are archosaurs, archosaurs are reptiles. It's based on the phylogeny. It's not like, oh, it has this many ticks on its maxilla and it breathes air and it has feathers, so it's a dinosaur. It's not like that. It's the tree that helps us define different things. Of course, this goes the other direction too. So if this is reptilia and everything over here is a reptile, because it all traces back to this common ancestor, here's the next bump on the tree. This one goes up to foxes, but this fox is representing all mammals. Mammals plus reptiles together have a common ancestor. That's interesting to think about. It's one of the things my lab actually studies because it's like a 300 million year old thing. The common ancestor of all of these animals, this is the node called amniota. All of these organisms lay an egg that's dry out of the water. Obviously, they do crazy things to it, and not all of them lay eggs anymore. But like a platypus is a mammal that lays an egg that looks just like a turtle egg. And so there are features at every one of these nodes. And if you're imagining the history of life as evolving populations, of course, every little piece of the tree is going to have information that helps us understand it. What gets interesting and fun is when those disagree with each other. And that's why scientists are always working on stuff. So does that help you understand how, like, we're not going to throw this word out. because it's functional. But in terms of biology and evolutionary history, this is what we're gonna mean, and this goes inside that one. Oh, when we get to fishes, it's gonna be a real nightmare, just saying. Okay. Let's talk about phylogenies more. Phylogenies can be built. They have to be built on characters. They have to be built on information. That information can be genetic. That information can be anatomical. Here's 3 things. You might not know what that top left one is. It's a fishy thing called a coelacanth. They live in the deep sea off South Africa and Indonesia. So there's a coelacanth, a trout, which is a fish that lives here in Idaho, and a cow. So there's 3 organisms there. I want you guys to chat with each other, please, and tell me what the hypothesis is of relationships amongst these 3 organisms on this phylogeny. So which ones are related to each other and which one is the sister to the other 2? It's not gonna be hard. Go ahead and talk to each other. What is this tree trying to show you?
It's pretty different.
So, I'm hearing you guys talk about, like, you're almost interpreting it. You're like trying to figure it out. You don't have to do that. As simple as you possibly can. This could be someone's idea. They're like, here's what I think. And they say this is how I think they are related to each other. What is the relationship being shown here? I don't care if you think it's right or not. What is the relationship being shown here? Yeah. And what does this represent? So on this phylogeny, which maybe is just some lady's idea, the coelacanth and the trout have a more recent common ancestor. They're closer to each other than either one is to the cow. The cow is over here by itself. It's the outgroup. Of course, all life is related. So eventually there's a common ancestor that these would share with the cow. But that's this. That's all it's trying to say. Coelacanth and trout go together, cow's over here. That's an idea you could have. What's your evidence for that idea? Here's another phylogeny. Here's another phylogeny of the same thing. If you have 3 things, there's only 3 possible ways they go together. Here's all 3 possibilities. You can look at them. Make sure you're like, yes, I understand why these are 3 different things. Now, I want you to please interpret the other 2, A, B, and C, and answer this question. Both of those questions, actually. One of those is the right answer. So which one is it, and how will you know? You can just yeah.
Because the coelacanth is informed of the related to the call are they are.
Yeah.
Different time was combination.
Okay, really quickly, can somebody just articulate what the relationships are in B? Just say it out loud.
cows are more related to each other than trout.
Okay, how about A, somebody else?
Cows are more closely related to each other than their common ancestors to coelacanth.
Awesome. Time to vote. Who thinks one of these is absolutely 100% solidly the right answer? Who thinks it's A? Raise your hand, that's all you have to do. Who thinks it's B? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Who thinks it's C? 1, 2, 3. This doesn't add up to 15, but that's okay. So nobody voted for A, that was clear. I think I missed some people. I think some people were KG. I think there was a lot of this happening. Okay. What would the evidence be? Before I even care which one's the real right answer. How would people decide with this? Besides saying, I don't know, I think it's this. Okay, great. Yeah. I'm gonna change what you just said about morphology to saying you could look at their. I'm gonna skip vertebrates. I'm not gonna write that because they're all vertebrates. You could do it with like flower petals too, but comparative anatomy. What else could be a source of data to make this determination? Habitat, something maybe could inform it. That sounds, I'm gonna tell you, that sounds dangerous to me at this scale. But you know what? You could try it. That's information you could gather, that's data. What else? DNA. Oof. I'm serious. Genetics changed everything because you'd have two people in the 70s yelling at each other, elephants go with rhinos, rhinos go with hippos. And then now in the 90s, everyone's like, here's 60,000 genes that show you that rhinos go with hippos. Like, got it. The hemoglobin, the structure of the electron transport chain, little mutations in the junk DNA, they all say hippos go with rhinos. Got it. That debate doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. Sometimes this is helpful, sometimes this is helpful, sometimes this is helpful. All together, are there any other pieces of data we could look at here? Taste, maybe. I don't know what that one would have to. How about somebody who's taken any of my other classes before? Oh, I'm gonna say they're fossils. I'm also gonna say the timeline. That's valid. I think that's real. Like how old different lineages are. Okay, so these are all things, and this is what's great about biology. This is why I love this job. This is why I love science, is because guess what? The fossils and the anatomy and the genome all work together, and you get these answers that are almost irrefutable. It's like all set. This is the answer, by the way. So this, by the way, just so you guys know, in the 1980s, when people were first using computers to do phylogenies, cow coelacanth trout is like the classic example. And college students all over the world in like 1986 are like yelling and getting mad because of course your brain is desperate for this to be the one. You want to put the fish with the fish and the mammal over here. That's not true. That fishy thing is more closely related to a cow than it is to the other fishy thing. But once you see all the information, it's like, oh my gosh, of course. It's really fun. All right, this is kind of a dumb question. This is a simple one. I want you to talk about it with each other. Let me know. All right, can we get somebody who hasn't spoken maybe quite so much yet? Somebody give me an answer to this.
They are the same tree, the nodes just kind of rotate.
Yes, just so you guys know, these can spin around, it doesn't matter. Here's what happens. You're never gonna see it. If I'm teaching, you're never gonna see it, but here's what people do. And everything else. And I'm always like, oh, no. I always make this a bird. And people will always be like over here. Because for some reason, being on the right and at the top is important. And that's not real, it's not biologically important. So this tree and this tree are showing you the exact same relationships. They are the same tree, and obviously they're not identical on the page. They're the same tree in terms of the information they include. All right, we are out of time, so I will stop right here. And don't worry, because next Tuesday is this exact same topic, so we're good. All right, see you guys then.
Class.